There are moments when you realize you aren't actually angry because of what just happened, but because of the feeling of being pulled away from yourself. A casual remark, a disrespectful look, an unanswered message, and suddenly your inner peace vanishes. It's not because the event was too significant, but because your reaction arrived before you could even realize what was going on. We often think that others make us lose our composure, but the truth is much harder to accept. We are the ones who gave them that power. Most people live in a state of reaction, reacting to words, reacting to attitudes, reacting to things that don't go as expected. Day after day, we are pulled away by emotions as if our inner self were an open door that anyone could walk through and disturb. And then we wonder why we are exhausted, why a small matter can ruin an entire day, and why calmness seems like something so fragile. But the problem does not lie in the outside world. It lies in the way we have become accustomed to reacting to that world. Stoicism does not teach you to become cold, nor does it teach you to pretend to be emotionless. It teaches you something far more subtle. Calmness is a skill, and that skill can be trained. Not to avoid life, but to stand firm within it. Not to defeat others, but to no longer be controlled by them. When you learn how to stay calm, you don't lose your power. You are reclaiming the power that you unconsciously gave away a long time ago. This video is not a list of quick tips. It is an internal journey. 10 milestones of awareness, gently guided so you can see more clearly how you react, how you judge, and how you can choose differently. Not instantly, not perfectly, but moment by moment. Because when you are no longer pulled away by anyone or anything, calmness is no longer a temporary state. It becomes the way you exist in this life. And all calmness, no matter how great, always begins with a very small moment. The moment you realize what is truly within your control and what is not. Principle 1. Control your reaction. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that you have power over your mind, not outside events. This is the foundation of Stoicism. When you understand this, you stop trying to control the world around you and begin to return to mastering your own reactions. This also means that there are things in life that are never in your hands: the attitudes of others, the words they speak, or the unexpected situations that strike. All of them happen without your permission. But there is one thing that always stays with you: how you perceive and react to what is unfolding. The problem is, a reaction rarely waits for you to be alert. It appears almost instantly. A remark that hurts your pride, a look that makes you feel dismissed, something that doesn't go the way you wanted. And before you can even realize it, emotion has taken the lead. You react out of habit, and only afterward do you find that you have gone further than you truly intended. What makes you lose your composure is not the event itself, but the habit of reacting that was formed long ago. You are used to responding immediately, used to protecting your ego, used to the feeling that if you don't react, you are weak. And it is that very habit that makes you lose the mastery you thought you still had. Stoicism does not teach you to become emotionless. It only reminds you to recognize that between what happens and how you react, there is always a space. That space is where the power of choice begins. When you pause for even a single breath, you have reclaimed control. Calmness, in that sense, is not the absence of emotion. It is the ability to see the emotion coming, but not letting it decide for you. And that is the true starting point of self-mastery. Principle 2. Expectations create anger. When anger arises, you often think it comes from the actions of others. An insensitive remark, an attitude that wasn't what you expected, a silence that makes you feel ignored. But if you look closer, you will realize that what hurts you does not lie entirely within that action, but in the gap between what you expected and what actually happened. Most of these expectations are never spoken aloud. You expect others to understand you. You expect them to behave more thoughtfully. You expect recognition, gratitude, or at least a timely response. And when those things do not appear, your mind reacts as if something is wrong. At this point, anger is not just an immediate reaction. It is the feeling of disappointment because reality failed to meet the standards you silently set. Epictetus once reminded us that it is not things themselves that disturb people, but their judgments about those things. When you attach your emotions to expectations of how others should behave, you are handing over control of your composure to things outside of your reach. You are no longer reacting to reality, but to a version of reality that you had imagined beforehand. In daily life, this happens very quietly. You don't realize you are expecting until the anger has already formed. You think you are reacting to someone else, but in truth, you are reacting to the internal sense of letdown. And as long as you fail to see that, anger will continue to return, no matter how many times the circumstances change. When you begin to identify your expectations, a small shift occurs. You don't need to eliminate expectations, nor do you need to blame your emotions. You only need to see clearly that they exist. The moment you distinguish between what is reality and what was your expectation, anger loses its silent power. And from that point on, you are no longer pulled away as easily as before. Principle 3. Pause before you respond. Most of the things you regret in life do not come from major decisions, but from rushed reactions. A message sent before you had time to think. A comment blurted out in the heat of anger. An argument is prolonged simply because you couldn't master your emotions. And afterward comes the lingering remorse. If only I had done things differently. The Stoic does not seek to defeat emotion with logic. They understand that when anger arises, logic usually arrives late. Therefore, they do not try to think correctly at that moment. They do only one thing. They do not act while emotion is behind the wheel. Not to escape, but to avoid causing self-inflicted harm. This pause is not a complex technique. It doesn't require deep self-understanding, nor does it demand perfect mindfulness. It is simply a very basic decision. Not to reply yet. Not to say that next sentence. Not to continue the dialogue when you know you are not in your best state. It is this small delay that makes a big difference. Because once the emotion is past, what you once wanted to say often is no longer as important as you thought. And if you have given yourself enough time not react immediately, you have avoided many unnecessary apologies and many relationships fractured by a single moment of lost control. The pause does not make you weak. It helps you retain your self-respect during the times when it is easiest to lose. Calmness here is not about suppression or pretending to be unaffected. It is the ability to allow the emotion to appear without giving it the power to decide for you. When you learn how to pause before you respond, you aren't just avoiding mistakes, you are building a form of silent strength that very few people have the patience to cultivate. Principle 4. Silence is self-mastery. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in a conversation is to say nothing at all. We are taught that we must speak up to defend ourselves, respond so as not to be looked down upon, and prove our point so as not to lose. But many times, what causes you to lose your self-respect is not silence, but the words that burst out simply to soothe a provoked ego. You speak not because you need to, but because you cannot stand the feeling of being challenged. There are situations where you could absolutely strike back. You have the logic, you have the evidence. You could even win that argument. But you still choose silence, not because you lack the ability, but because you realize that proving yourself right now brings nothing but exhaustion. Some conversations do not need to be won. They only need to be left behind. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself that a person's value does not lie in how quickly they react, but in whether they can maintain their composure when tested. When you are silent at the right time, you do not lose your voice. You simply refuse to let your emotions speak for you. Timely silence is not avoidance. It is the clarity to recognize that not every provocation requires an answer, and not every misunderstanding needs to be cleared up immediately. When you do not respond, you do not lose. You simply refuse to participate in an exchange that offers nothing but weariness. There is a vast difference between silence out of fear and silence out of mastery. Silence out of fear makes you shrink. Silence out of mastery helps you stand firm. It keeps you in the position of the observer rather than the one dragged into the emotional vortex of others. And in many situations, that is the safest position for your dignity. Principle 5. Not everything is personal. There are very small moments, yet they are enough to make you start doubting yourself. A message is sent that receives no reply. Someone's attitude suddenly shifts. A person gradually drifts away without reason. And almost immediately, a familiar question echoes in your mind. What did I do wrong? We often don't realize how quickly we interpret everything. In just a few seconds, the mind manages to construct a story where you are always the cause. But much of our pain does not come from what actually happened, but from the extra details you imagined. Most of what others say and do does not start with you. It starts with the pressures, the exhaustion, and the internal battles that you cannot see. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." This is very true for these moments. Someone is silent and you feel excluded. Someone is irritable and you assume you caused it. But many changes in the attitudes of others simply reflect their state of mind, not your value. When you stop viewing every reaction around you as a message intended specifically for you, a sense of relief emerges. You no longer have to be defensive before every glance, no longer have to explain every silence, and no longer have to adjust yourself to fit the moods of others. You return to them the responsibility for their emotions and keep for yourself the necessary tranquility. When you stop personalizing everything, peace begins to appear. You no longer have to be defensive before every glance, no longer have to adjust yourself to fit the moods of others. You return to them the responsibility for their emotions and keep for yourself the necessary tranquility. That is when you stop carrying on your shoulders things that never belonged to you. Principle 6. Choose your battles. Not every provocation needs to be answered. Not every disagreement needs to be clarified. And not every argument requires you to step in and prove you are right. But the instinct of the ego often makes you forget that. It whispers that if you remain silent, you are losing. If you let it go, you are weak. And if you don't react, you are letting others get the better of you. The truth is, many confrontations bring nothing but depletion. You may win in words, but lose in peace. You may prove yourself right, but at the cost of time, energy, and emotions that you will never get back. It's not because you aren't strong enough to confront, but because you are clear-headed enough to realize that the battle is not worth it. Sometimes, the only thing you need to do is not to react, but to take a step back. Not to think deeper, but to look wider. What is frustrating you now may seem massive in this moment, but it rarely maintains its importance over time. When you ask yourself that question, many confrontations naturally lose their weight. Choosing your battles does not make you smaller. It makes it clearer. You save your energy for what truly matters, your work, your growth, and the relationships worth protecting. And when you learn to be selective in this way, you aren't just protecting your inner peace. You are living more intentionally instead of letting circumstances and others decide for you. Principle 7. Let go of the need to prove. There are times when you realize you are speaking not to clarify the truth, but to soothe an uncomfortable feeling within. The feeling of being doubted, being misunderstood, being seen in a way that doesn't align with who you think you are. And almost instinctively, you want to explain. You want to say more. You want to prove that the other person is seeing it wrong. But the more you try to prove yourself, the deeper you are pulled into a familiar loop. Every explanation opens up a new doubt. Every attempt to clarify forces you to say even more. Very quickly, what matters is no longer right or wrong, but the feeling of not being properly recognized. And in that very moment, composure begins to slip away. There is a truth that is not easy to accept. Your value does not increase every time you win an argument. It also does not decrease just because someone fails to understand you. What is truly solid does not need to be defended with constant words. It stands on its own, even in silence. When you stop trying to make everyone understand you immediately, you are no longer pressured to react, to clarify, or to prove yourself in every moment. You let time and actions speak for you, instead of trying to persuade while emotions are still interfering. Letting go of the need to prove yourself does not make you weaker. It helps you retain your tranquility. When you no longer need validation to feel enough, you begin to truly stand firm. Principle 8. Your body warns you first. Before you can even name an emotion, your body has already reacted. A heartbeat faster than usual, tense shoulders, a clenched jaw, a heavy feeling in your chest that you cannot immediately explain. You often ignore these signals, assuming they are just fleeting fatigue, but many times the body has recognized that something is wrong before the mind even understands what is happening. When tension appears, you usually try to justify it through thoughts. You ask yourself what you are frustrated about, who you are annoyed with, or whether you are overreacting. But Stoicism does not begin with analyzing thoughts. It begins with recognizing the state. Before you argue with your emotions, pay attention to what your body is saying. For the body does not know how to lie, and it does not need a story to react. There is a reason why many impulsive reactions happen so quickly. It's not because you lack logic, but because you missed the first warning signal. When the body tenses up, the mind easily finds a reason to react. And if you only pay attention to your thoughts without recognizing your physical state, you are almost always one step behind. When you start listening to these signals, a subtle shift occurs. You realize you are being pulled in before you are completely swept away. A rapid breath becomes a reminder to stop. A feeling of constriction becomes a sign that this is not the time to respond. Stoicism, at a deeper level, is not just about mastering thoughts. It is the ability to return to the body before the mind constructs its story. When you learn to recognize these early signals, you don't have to struggle to be calm. You are calmer sooner, and many regrettable reactions will never have to happen. Principle 9. Let go to stay free. There are times when you think you have moved on. The past is no longer mentioned. That person is no longer present. Those circumstances do not repeat. But as soon as a familiar detail appears, a voice, an attitude, a reminiscent situation, your body reacts as if everything had never ended. You realize that you have left the situation, but the reaction remains. It is not a clear memory, but a familiar feeling that refuses to leave. As soon as that old spot is touched, the reflex immediately returns. You know you are no longer in that situation, but the reflex does not care. It only repeats what once helped you defend yourself. Very often, outside life has moved on, but inside, you are still holding a silent pull. Not because you are intentionally clinging, but because you still wish for something to be different. A reaction from someone else, a late recognition, a clearer ending. And it is that unreleased desire that keeps you from truly leaving. Epictetus once reminded us that people are not bound by what has happened, but by what they still carry in their minds. Letting go, in that sense, is not about erasing the past, but about ceasing to hold on to the old reactions that continue to dominate you in the present. It is letting go of the need to control how others behave, letting go of the desire to be understood or compensated, letting go of the story you unconsciously repeat every time that familiar feeling arises. When you still hold on to these things, you are not just remembering the past, you are living in it. You respond to the present with an old internal state rather than with the clarity of this moment. And therefore, even though circumstances have changed, your inner freedom remains held back. Letting go is not about forgiving others, nor is it about denying what happened. It is the decision to stop handing over control of your emotions to things outside of your reach. When you stop demanding that reality be different before you can be at peace, the weight begins to lift from your shoulders. Freedom does not come from everything being perfectly resolved. It appears when you no longer let something from the past dictate how you live today. When you let go in the right place, you don't lose your power. You reclaim it. Because only when you are no longer pulled by what lies outside of yourself are you truly free. Principle 10. Calm is your power. At some point you realize that calmness is not something you try to achieve in uncomfortable situations. It is the state you return to when you no longer allow others, circumstances, or fleeting emotions to decide how you react. Calmness does not appear when everything is peaceful. It appears when you have stopped letting external chaos penetrate your inner self. A calm person is not someone who feels nothing. They still clearly feel frustration, disappointment, or pressure, but they do not rush to act upon those emotions. They let everything unfold, observe it long enough, and then choose how to stand within the situation. And it is precisely this slowing down that makes the difference. Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, did not write his meditations in peace. He wrote amidst war, plague, betrayal, and decisions that allowed no room for error. And it was in those circumstances that he reminded himself that the greatest strength does not lie in external power, but in the ability to keep the mind from being swept away by the surrounding chaos. When you understand that, calmness is no longer a reaction, it becomes a position. In that position, you don't need to win every argument. You don't need to prove you are right. You don't need to control how others behave. You choose silence when necessary. You choose to walk away when it is enough. You choose to respond instead of reacting. Not because you are weak, but because you are no longer being pulled. Calmness is power because it returns the right of choice to you. When the mind is not swept away, you see more clearly what is worth keeping, what should be let go, and what no longer belongs to you. You do not let a temporary moment decide how you live in the long term. And that is the end of this journey. Not for you to become cold or distant, but for you to stand firmer in a volatile world. When you maintain your calmness, you don't need to be loud to prove your strength, because that composure itself says it all. Every principle you have just gone through leads to a common point. The power to choose how you react always belongs to you. When you let go in the right place, you become lighter. When you pause at the right time, you become clearer. When you do not let the outside world decide your internal state, you become free. No need to prove anything. No need for noise. Calmness itself is power. If this journey resonated with you, choose one principle that you feel fits best and start applying it today. Just one. And observe how things gradually change. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Stoic Journey channel to continue accompanying us on the path of practicing Stoicism.